Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Donald J. Beardsley was born on May 13, 1943 in St. Louis, Missouri. He was the eldest of 3 children and grew up with married parents. Unfortunately, his father died when he was just 11 years old, leaving his mother to take care of the family all by herself. 4 years after the death of his father, Donald, who was considered a very shy and socially awkward child with no history of violence, was sent to military school until the age of 18. By 19, he decided to join the Air Force and was working as an aircraft mechanic. In 1965, he and another serviceman were caught stealing a car, so they were both transferred to Minnesota, where he was relieved from his mechanic job and was sentenced to a work farm. While at the work farm, he suffered head trauma after being struck in the head by a tree, so he stayed in a coma for a while. After 4 years in the Air Force, he was discharged, and upon leaving, he started a relationship with a woman by the name of Karen Kelly, and the two married in 1966, but divorced 2 years later in 1968. The following year, in December of 1969, and now living in the state of Missouri, Donald would frequent bars. One night, while hanging out at a local bar, he met a 54-year-old woman by the name of Laura Griffin. The two went home together, and instead of it being a casual hookup like Laura assumed, Donald killed Laura that night. Laura was in her bathtub for 2 days, and the only reason her body was discovered was because Donald spoke with his minister and a lawyer and decided to confess to police. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. While in prison, he met with many social workers, psychiatrists, and therapists, but it was never on a consistent basis. He said he had no reason to kill Laura, had no idea why he did it, and then blamed it on the fact that he could have been drunk. In prison, he was also diagnosed for the first time, and the diagnosis was schizophrenia. It was documented that he did try to receive support while locked up, but the prison was not able to provide regular treatment and/or support. Even though Donald was sentenced to 18 years, he was released after 7 years for good behavior. He was paroled and had to live in Redwood City, California, near his mother. He ended up getting a job working at HP as a machine operator and was living an honest life, but his honest life was short-lived. It was the beginning of 1981 when Donald was driving one day and picked up a female prostitute by the name of Ricky Soria. Ricky was also a drug dealer who was an addict herself. She and Donald became friends, used together, and Donald invited Ricky to live with him, and she agreed. By this time, Donald was no longer with his mom and was living on his own. The two were roommates, and Ricky was now introducing Donald to her friends, who were also up to no good: Stacy Benjamin, Ed and Patty Gedling, and Frank Rutherford. In March of 1981, Ricky was given drugs by Frank, which caused her to overdose. She survived because Donald was able to take her to the emergency room in time, but things went downhill from there. Everyone involved in this story ended up giving different accounts of what happened and why murders occurred, but the anger shifted from Frank to Stacy and Patty because a man by the name of Bill Forrester said that the two women cheated him out of $185 worth of drugs. Ed was also mad at his wife Patty because he caught her cheating on him with Stacy, so it was said that he actually purchased a shotgun and gave it to Frank because the men were all in agreement that the women needed to die. It was April 23, 1981, when Ricky invited Patty and Stacy to her place so she could sell them some drugs. Once the women arrived, they were met by Donald, Frank, and Ricky. Equipped with a shotgun, Frank shot Patty in the shoulder and then tied the women up. Frank winked at Donald, saying that he would take Patty to the hospital, but they had other plans. His intentions were actually to make Stacy think that everything would be okay. Frank, Ricky, and Donald ended up leaving Stacy alone and drove Patty to Half Moon Bay, where Frankie shot Patty 2 times. After handing the shotgun to Donald, He too shot Patty twice more, and they left her for dead. Frank, Donald, and Ricky drove back to Donald's apartment, where Stacy was still there all alone and unable to move. They went on a cocaine binge and drove over 100 miles to Lake County, California. Frank attempted to kill Stacy but was unable to, so asked for Donald's assistance. Donald hit her and then finished what Frank was unable to do. Stacy's body was left behind, but her body was discovered soon after her death, and police found a phone number that was left behind and found out the number belonged to Donald. When police questioned Donald, he confessed on the spot and told on the others that were involved as well. Being that Donald was still on parole for his first murder, he was eligible for the death penalty. Frank was sentenced to life in prison but died in 2003 while locked up. Ricky pled guilty to second-degree murder and spent time in prison. Bill was acquitted of all charges, and Donald was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. There were appeals made that were ultimately denied. During one appeal, they tried to argue that Donald did not have the proper legal representation, being that his lawyer quit during trial, and they also tried to assert that he was mentally ill. Donald was sentenced to death on March 12, 1984, and he was transferred to San Quentin Prison in California on March 14, 1984. In 2005, many tried to appeal to new Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Donald was the first death row inmate to plead for clemency since Schwarzenegger had taken office, but he denied Donald's clemency. He did come out with a statement that read, "We are not dealing here with a man who was so generally affected by his impairment that he cannot tell the difference between right and wrong." With that, Donald was set to be executed on January 19, 2005. He chose not to request a last meal and was given what all other prisoners had that day, which was chili macaroni, mixed veggies, salad, and a cake, but he refused to eat anything. He chose not to request a last meal and was given what all other prisoners had that day, which was chili macaroni, mixed veggies, salad, and cake, but he refused to eat anything. He made no final words, showed no remorse, and died by method of lethal injection. He was initially sentenced to die by method of the gas chamber, but since California changed its method, his method of execution changed as well. Donald Wackerly was born on October 8, 1969. At a very early age, he began drinking and using steroids to bulk up. He experimented with other drugs, and when he turned 24, he started using meth. He would spend $25 a week on meth and quickly became an addict. His $25 a week habit jumped to $300 a day worth of crack. Despite being an addict, Donald found love and married a woman named Michelle. The couple did not have a lot of money, and on September 6, 1996, Donald told his wife that they needed money and he would do whatever it took to get it. While talking to his wife, Donald was wearing latex gloves and loading his rifle. The following day, on September 7, 1996, Donald chose to put his plans into fruition, so he got in his truck with Michelle and they drove to a dam near Muldrow, Oklahoma. They spotted a blue Toyota pickup by a levee and saw an elderly man that was fishing alone on the opposite side of the levee. Michelle got out of the car alone and went looking to see if there was anyone else around. The coast was clear and Michelle walked towards the man and they spoke for about 5 minutes. The man was 51-year-old Pam Sayakumane. After chatting with Pam, Michelle left and went back to where Donald had parked his car near Pam's. Michelle and Donald waited in their car for Pam to finish fishing, and after about 45 minutes, Pam came walking towards the cars with his fishing equipment. Seeing that Pam was on his way, Donald got out of his Jeep and raised the hood in order to make it look like he needed a jump. When Pam was close enough, Donald asked him if he had any jumper cables. Michelle knew that Pam was about to die, so she hid behind the Jeep. Donald shot Pam over 5 times and killed him. Once the shooting was over, Michelle came from behind the Jeep, and Donald put Pam's body in the truck bed and then got into the truck and drove it into the water. They gathered his fishing equipment and tossed everything into a nearby wooded area. Donald did, however, decide to keep a few things of Pam's, like his fishing reel and tackle box. A couple of days after the murder, Donald pawned Pam's fishing reel at Rocky's Pawn Shop in Roland, but he decided to keep the tackle box for himself. Just hours after the murder, at 12:30 a.m. on September 8th, a man by the name of Dennis Butler went four-wheeling near a dam on the Arkansas River with his nephew Rodney. Their fun was interrupted when they noticed a truck that was almost fully submerged in the water and a body lying in the truck bed. The men left to Rodney's house and phoned the police to report what they had seen. Police made it to Rodney's and they followed him and his uncle to the exact location of where they spotted the truck. The body was collected, and after an investigation, they found out that the body belonged to none other than Pam Sayakhumane. Investigators had no leads and no suspects. It wasn't until December of 1996 Michelle Wackerly decided to come clean. Michelle hired an attorney, and together they met with Oklahoma's State Bureau of Investigation agents Franchini and Page. Michelle told the agents what happened on the day of September 7, 1996, and led them to the exact location of the murder. Michelle also told the agents that Donald pawned Pam's fishing reel, so they made it to Rocky's pawn shop and got the fishing reel. They spoke with the owner of the pawn shop, and he confirmed that Donald was indeed the person who brought the fishing reel to the shop. After leaving the pawn shop, the next location was Donald's apartment. Their search resulted in them finding the rifle that was used to kill Pam, along with a box of ammo, latex gloves, and Pam's tackle box that Donald was unable to part from. The very last stop was the wooded area Donald dumped the other fishing equipment. Michelle led them to the location, and the agents were able to recover everything that was thrown out. Donald was arrested and sentenced to death in 1998 by a Sequoia County jury and sent to Oklahoma State Pen. Donald maintained his innocence and said that his wife was setting him up because she hated him so much. While in prison, Donald converted to Buddhism. Over the years, he tried to appeal his case numerous times. One point on an appeal that made the state do a lot of research was Donald's claim that the location where Pam was killed belonged to the government, so he should have had a federal trial, not a state trial. The appeal was denied, and the response was, in compliance with this statutory directive, the Secretary promulgated the following regulation, now incorporated into the Code of Federal Regulations. Except as otherwise provided in this part or by federal law or regulation, state and local laws and ordinances shall apply on project lands and waters. This includes, but is not limited to, state and local laws and ordinances governing, number 1, operation and use of motor vehicles, vessels, and aircraft. Number 2, hunting, fishing, and trapping. Number 3, use or possession of firearms or other weapons. Number 4, civil disobedience and criminal acts. Number 5, littering, sanitation, and pollution. Number 6, alcohol or other controlled substances. These state and local laws and ordinances are enforced by those state and local enforcement agencies established and authorized for that purpose. Through this regulation, duly promulgated by the Secretary of the Army acting on behalf of the United States on authority delegated by Congress, the United States consented to state jurisdiction over criminal acts committed on Corps of Engineers, project waters, and properties. Assuming, therefore, that the murder in this case occurred on the Corps of Engineers property, which is part of a navigable river and channel maintenance flood control project, as Wackerly asserts, the state of Oklahoma properly exercised jurisdiction over the situs of the crime by express consent of the United States. There is no merit to Wackerly's claim that Oklahoma's jurisdiction to prosecute this case was displaced by exclusive federal jurisdiction. Because we find that the state of Oklahoma properly exercised jurisdiction in the prosecution of this matter, there is also no merit to Wackerly's claim that prior counsel were ineffective for not raising this jurisdictional claim in previous proceedings. Donald's execution was set for October 14, 2010, days after his birthday. He had a final meal of a medium stuffed crust pizza from Pizza Hut with mushrooms, bell peppers, black olives, and jalapenos. To drink, he had a Dr. Pepper, and for dessert, he had a coconut cream pie and a chocolate shake. The U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeals, and they also denied a motion filed by Donald's attorneys requesting that a spiritual advisor be present with him during the execution. On the day of the execution, 2 Buddhist monks were in the witness room as viewers.
Well, today is October 14th, and 4 hours from now, Don Wackerly will be executed in Oklahoma. So this is very much in all of our minds and hearts right now.
For Donald's final words, he began chanting a hymn of ultimate compassion. The monks joined in on the chant, and Donald's attorneys did as well. Within minutes of them chanting, Warden Randy Workman shouted, "Let the execution begin." Donald was pronounced dead 6 minutes later at 6:12 p.m. He died by method of lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Pen in McAlester.
If you say taking a life is wrong, then taking a life is wrong across the board. For him, this has been, almost a half a century of systems failing him.
You can't stop me. I'll be gone momentarily, and I'll be back with a vengeance and coming back stronger.
Donald Grant Young was born on December 17, 1975. He grew up in New York and lived in an area where there was nothing but crack and violence. In the 80s, crack cocaine was rampant in New York, causing an increase in different types of assault and crime altogether. Crack was cheap, and not only was it on the rise because of the affordability, but for the effect and hold it had on many people. African American communities were affected the most, especially in the inner cities. Death, addiction, and crime was not able to escape Donald nor his family. His mother was using throughout her time carrying Donald, and as an infant, he had many health issues because of that. He did not have the best life growing up, and being surrounded by addiction caused him to suffer from different mental health issues that went left untreated. Donald had siblings, but because of the chaotic home life, they were eventually left to fend for themselves and live on the streets of Brooklyn, New York. They were left to find food and shelter on their own. Finally, CPS got involved, but unfortunately for Donald and his siblings, they were all separated. Donald bounced from foster home to foster home, never having a stable place to live. Without ever truly seeing a constant positive thing in his life, Donald turned to a life of crime, something that was his normal. Fast forward to the year 2001, Donald was in a relationship with a couple of women. The first woman was Shlonda Gatewood, who was no stranger to living a life of crime. Shlonda ended up getting locked up at the Oklahoma County Jail, and Donald was set on doing whatever he needed to do to get money for her bail. His second girlfriend, Cheryl Tubbs, used to work at the La Quinta Inn in Del City. She was fired in early 2001, and Donald thought robbing Cheryl's old place of work would be exactly what he needed to do to bail Shonda out of jail. On July 18, 2001, Donald entered La Quinta Inn and asked a front desk clerk for an application and to speak with the manager. Workers believed he was inquiring about getting a new job, and while he was waiting for a manager, he made the decision to kill any witnesses to his crime. He was familiar with the layout of the building and also knew where the CCTV cameras were located. After waiting for a short while, the manager of the inn, Brenda McElia, started walking towards Donald. Donald noticed her and began walking towards her as well. When they were close enough to each other, Donald flashed his pistol and forced her to walk to the storage room. Once inside, he fatally shot Brenda. Donald left the storage room and then made his way to the break room where he saw employee Suzette Smith. He demanded that she leave the break room and get money out of the front register for him. She gave him money, and after she completed his request, he made her walk into the manager's office. Once inside, Suzette was a strong fighter and survived 3 shots to the face. She continued to fight despite being hit with multiple objects like a computer monitor. Donald did whatever he could and continued trying to kill her using different methods, and Suzette unfortunately succumbed to her wounds. Donald stole items from Suzette's purse and casually walked out of the hotel inn to a discount store that was nearby. On his way to the store, he ditched his gun, along with some traveler's checks that were given to him by Suzette since they were in the register. Donald then called a taxi and requested to be taken to Cheryl's house. Hours later, Donald was able to use the money he made in the robbery to pay for Shlonda's $200 bond. Why do you think criminals kill witnesses over such small amounts of money? Have you noticed that the ones who don't want any witnesses end up getting caught still? Shlonda, now a free woman, was greeted by Donald when she was released from jail, and the two of them stole a car and drove it from Oklahoma City to New York City to stay with some of Donald's family. After a month on the run and killing 2 people over a few $100s, Donald was caught, arrested in New York, and sent back to Oklahoma. Donald was charged in the Oklahoma County District Court, and he was charged with 2 counts of first-degree malice aforethought murder along with 2 counts of robbery with firearms. The state felt that the murders were heinous enough for the death penalty. Donald's trial began on November 14, 2005, and ended on November 23, 2005, with Judge Jerry Bass presiding over the case. Donald was found guilty of all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison for the robbery charges and a death sentence for each murder count. Over the years, there were appeals, and one point on an appeal was that Donald felt he was incompetent to stand trial. From the time he was first sent to jail to await his trial up until his trial, he was examined, and it was determined that he suffered from mental illnesses. Some family members testified that he was acting strange and different before the murders, and it turned out he was suffering from schizophrenia, but he was not diagnosed until after being locked up. Donald was given medication, but was not consistent with taking it, and he felt his mental health declined by the time trial started. Professional health experts and Donald's legal team felt he was competent to stand trial, and Donald felt that his lawyers did not do a good job fighting to help support his claim. The court replied by saying, "The trial court's decision whether sufficient doubt exists about a defendant's ability to proceed is reviewed for an abuse of discretion. The trial court may consider the defendant's behavior, his demeanor at trial, and of course, any expert evidence on the issue. Typically, the court will rely heavily on the perceptions of defense counsel, whose job it is to consult with his client personally, explain the proceedings to him, and obtain relevant information from him about how to proceed." Closer to the time of trial, on guilt and punishment, and during the trial itself, the court had several discussions with appellant about various matters, including potential conflicts of interest and defense counsel's strategy of acknowledging guilt. Thus, the trial court not only observed appellant personally in pretrial settings, but conversed with him about matters bearing directly on his ability to understand choices in legal strategy. Our review of these exchanges shows appellant to have had a rather keen understanding of the legal process and shows he was able to make important decisions. The letter appellant addressed to the prosecutor shortly before trial, wherein he detailed his commission of the crimes, may not have been the most prudent course of action, but it does not show that he was unable to grasp the ramifications of such an admission. To the contrary, the letter indicates that appellant was fully aware of what he was doing. Similarly, appellant's testimony in the punishment stage of trial, wherein he tried to explain his actions but expressed no remorse, may not have been beneficial to him, but it does not indicate an inability to comprehend the nature of the proceedings. Appellant's two-lawyer defense team was experienced and zealous, considering that the overwhelming evidence against their client limited their options. Appellant asked this court to disregard the lack of doubt by those who interacted with him at the time and substitute the retrospective evaluation of a different expert, Dr. McGarren, that appellant now presents on appeal. According to the supplementary materials appellant has presented, Dr. McGarren interviewed trial counsel and appellant some 2 years after trial and reviewed, among other things, appellant's medical records while he was in jail awaiting trial. Both trial attorneys maintained that at the time of trial, they believed appellant understood the nature of the proceedings. Nevertheless, Dr. McGarren concludes that appellant was unable to rationally assist them in his defense. This claim seems to be based on the fact that appellant testified in the punishment stage against counsel's advice. This response also tied into another point on Donald's appeal, where he said he should have been able to represent himself at trial.
A lot of my actions I have done are not thinking. I can't really explain myself, because the truth be told, I really don't understand myself mentally.
Then this exchange when one board member questioned him about the planning and motivation of the killings.
You chose to not leave any live witnesses, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was so you wouldn't get caught.
Yes.
And that was the choice you made.
Yes.
Afraid, and he understands that he may die like John Grant.
I do have concern that I'm going to be botched. It's been told to me on 2 different occasions that I will be botched.
All of Donald's appeals were denied, and he was scheduled to be executed on Thursday, January 27th of this year, 2022. The day before his execution, on Tuesday, January 25th, Donald was denied his final clemency with a 4-1 vote from the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board. The following day, on January 26th, the U.S. Supreme Court denied an emergency stay of execution. Donald was offered to die by firing squad, but he chose to die by method of lethal injection. He was Oklahoma's first execution in the year 2022. Donald's execution also marked the first execution in the United States this year. Before his death, he was able to enjoy a last meal of Chinese food consisting of egg rolls, shrimp, fried rice, and sesame chicken. He also had an apple fritter and 3 pints of strawberry ice cream. For Donald's last words, he was given 2 minutes to say whatever he wanted to say before his mic was cut off. He continued to speak after his mic went off, and drugs were administered, but it was incoherent. Some of the things witnesses were able to hear Donald say was, "Yo God, I got this. No medication, I didn't take nothing. Brooklyn for life. I'm solid, son. No meds, no nothing. I'm solid. I'm going to the universe and then I'll be back. God is here. The true God. I've got things to handle. No doubt, no doubt." He was executed at the Oklahoma State Pen in McAlester, and his official time of death was at 10:16 a.m. There were over a dozen witnesses at Donald's execution. The memories of the murder, the trial, and the years spent waiting can be replaced with happier memories of Brenda. Memories of her laughter, her smile, her wit, her charm, and her loving heart. I, for one, am ready to remember the beauty of my sister instead of reliving the brutality of her death. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions. I do have another question for you guys. If a criminal, for example, is diagnosed like Donald with schizophrenia after or during trial, do you think that they are competent to stand trial? I believe that some people with certain mental health disorders can appear to be coherent or intelligent, but I don't think that negates the fact that they actually have a disorder. Or do you feel that even if they have a disorder, they should still face the death penalty because of their crime? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and if you have time, check out my website, deathrowexecutions.net.